And here we go. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Double Digit Hockey Show. I am your host, John Easthope. Thanks for making me a part of your evening. Lined up for you this week. We're going to dial it back a little bit on the NHL talk this week, and that's okay because we've got some great prospect talk coming, and I got a great guest going to join me here. Content, if I can get my words out here, and then Eastern Scout for FC Hockey, so Future Considerations Hockey. Josh Bell joins me on the show. Josh, thank you so much for taking some time out of your day for me.
Yeah, for sure, John. Thanks for having me on.
No problem. All right, so let's talk a little bit about Future Considerations Hockey at the beginning here. What drew you to Future Considerations, and what makes them so awesome for you?
I remember when I first got involved in just kind of watching prospects and loving to the World Juniors, Future Considerations, FC Hockey. They were always just a place that I went to for some reliable information. And then I started out with the hockey writers and started writing about draft prospects. And a lot of the guys I started talking to worked with FC Hockey. And turns out they had a spot for a scout, so I applied. But yeah, I've always loved their rankings, their information. They've always just been so knowledgeable on prospects. So it's really an honor to be a part of that.
So a lot of people grow up and they want to be the hockey player or the coach, or they want to be the big broadcaster like me. Like I want to be the big broadcaster guy. Why scouting? What drew you to be a scout and to do some scouting for FC?
It's been a funny path. I grew up playing. I was a goalie, and I actually broke my hip when I was 15, so that ended my playing career.
Oh.
And then I went into wanting to be a sport journalist, and that kind of just led into me really focusing in on prospects, focusing on the draft. And it's kind of funny. I didn't even think about scouting, and then it just ended up happening.
That is a hip. How do you break a hip playing goal? There's got to be a good story about the break there.
Yeah, it's funny. I was trying out for Junior A. I was a year too young, but they invited me to the camp. And I made a butterfly save and went to get up with my right leg, and somebody ran into me at the same time. So I was crouched on my left knee with the right knee up, and it just popped funny, and it cracked the ball of my hip, and then it healed over, and it was, I've had 4 surgeries, and probably a hip replacement is in the future.
Wow. Normally you hear about a hurt hip and you think about an 89-year-old, but in this case it was a teenager, so that's interesting. So there's a lot about this pandemic and what is done to scouting and what scouts can and not do. Take us behind this. What's scouting like during a global pandemic?
Completely virtual, at least for me. I know some parts of the world, even Western Canada, we've had some guys in rinks a little bit. Joel Henderson, he's one of our Western Hockey League scouts. He was in the Regina hub for the WHL. We've had a couple Swedish guys live, but for the most part, it's very, very virtual. So going back, watching tape over and over again, we're lucky to have Instat with FC Hockey, which kind of gives you clips of that particular player you're looking at. But yeah, it's been a little weird. I was since this is my first year with FC Hockey, I was hoping to get into rinks. Didn't turn out that way, but I've watched a lot online, so it's kind of nice to be able to just decide, you know what, I'm going to watch a game right now and flip one on. You can go watch any game. So it's kind of nice that way, but you don't really get that full rink atmosphere, that full view of a player on the bench and before and after the game. But it is what it is. You got to roll with the punches.
So I assume, like other scouts out there, you were very happy to get the U18s and a chance to see some of these that we haven't had a chance to see yet this year. How was overall your thoughts at the under 18s? How did that go for you and your overall thoughts on that tournament?
That was great. Really, really great tournament. It was really nice to kind of watch live hockey as it was happening for juniors. Haven't had a lot of that this year, especially with me being in Ontario. So yeah, really great games. Really impressed by some of the teams. I think a few players really bumped their stock. I know we didn't have a whole lot that didn't play at all this year. I think there's about 5 OHL guys that didn't hit the ice at all. So it was nice to see them in action. But overall, yeah, really impressed with the tournament, and it was great to be able to watch every game of that.
Yeah, it's a tournament that I don't think it's enough eyeballs. A lot of people focus on that World Junior Championship and those kind of tournaments. I don't think the U18 gets enough love for what it actually brings, and so it's good that to go forward in Texas there, and we're able to get our eyeballs on some guys, including the next guy, Wright. He led the way for Team Canada, not unexpectedly either. Just your thoughts on Shane Wright and what you saw from him at this tournament.
Yeah, he's just so impressive. And whether he's on the bench or he's on the ice, he was the leader of that team. At one of the press conferences after the games, the Canadian head coach was saying that even on the bench when they were up 6-1, I think or 6-0, whatever it was, against Sweden, Shane Wright was out there demanding more from the team. He wanted them just to be their best. So just from a guy who's not eligible till 2022, it's just so impressive to see that maturity in his game. And then he just has the skill to back it up. I think the first game he had a hat trick, and then he only played 5 games, but he set the Canadian record for goals with 9. It was so impressive to watch him, and I wish he would have got the full tournament. I think he could have really run away with the tournament scoring lead. But the games we did see, especially in the medal rounds, he's a special talent.
I'm glad you mentioned his maturity there, because I don't think that's a portion of the game that people can quite appreciate watching a guy on TV. But can you speak a little about his maturity and what makes Wright click in your eyes at such a young age, but plays like he's 2 or 3 years older than he actually is?
Yeah, he's had the benefit of playing above his age for so long now. He plays in tournaments over his age. He was at the U20 selection camp. So he knows what it takes to play at that next level. He knows what it takes to be that mature player on the team. He was the Frontenac's assistant, I think it was. He was part of their leadership group in his rookie season. So obviously the coaches see that leadership that he has, and it is really impressive to see somebody at his age just so calm and composed, whether it's in an interview, whether it's on the bench, on the ice. It's really impressive. I think he's going to be something special at the next level for sure, and he could follow McDavid in that young player to wear the C for whichever team he goes to.
Absolutely. Wearing the C for Team Canada from Canada Brass says a lot about his maturity level. So it's good to see him take that role on and use it and excel at it. It was incredible to watch. Now, the next guy in line for after Shane Wright, this is the guy that everyone's going to blush over. He's not eligible for a couple of drafts still. Conor Bedard, he looked very well for his first time at a tournament like this. Under 18s, he's playing well under his age group. A little bit about what you saw from the next Conor.
Yeah, for sure. Talk about maturity again. But for him, it was just, I was so surprised by his two-way play. In his own end, he was so good, and he was relied on by the coaches. And it was the first game. A couple of the older guys were benched, and Bedard was double shifted. And he's 15, the youngest player in the tournament, and under 18 tournament. And he just got better and better as the tournament went on. Obviously, he finished second in the tournament scoring, and he had some highlight reel plays. So yeah, it's going to be the fact that he could play in this tournament for another couple of years is pretty exciting.
Yeah, it's very exciting for not only us, but for him as well to be able to prove those skills. Now, we'll spend a ton of time on Conor Bedard because there'll be plenty of time to talk about him. There is a Russian equivalent to Conor Bedard. I think you know who I'm going to talk about. I can never say his name properly, so apologize. But Mitch, maybe a little bit about that Russian superstar and what he's like.
Yeah, he's just. So it's hard. You talk about Bedard and Wright's maturity, and for Michkov, he's just that pure skill. Like his ability to score goals, his ability to find the lanes to the net, and he can do it so many different ways, which is so impressive. Whether he needs to create space with his feet, whether he breaks somebody's ankles with his hands, or he just fires it out from out far, or he's behind the net and he scores a lacrosse goal. It was really impressive to see him score. Almost every one of his goals seemed to be different. So yeah, he was definitely the most exciting player of the tournament for me.
Yeah, he led the in scoring, and he led the talented Russian team. Maybe a little bit about what you saw out of Team Russia throughout this tournament. And they fall short in the end, not that gold medal that they obviously wanted. What did you see from Team Russia?
I think there were some games that they were really carried by their goaltender. So he's a 2022 eligible, Sergei Ivanov. He stole some games for them. It was really impressive. There was a couple games with the Finns, the Americans, the Czechs. They were all very, very close. Obviously, that pool was much more difficult than the one Canada was in, but Russia played a very complete game. I think they especially from their forwards. They relied a lot on their forwards and their goaltender. Their defense wasn't one of the stronger ones in the tournament. You could probably say that about every team, I guess, but their forwards, Nikita Chibrikov, their captain, he really led the way for them, I think. And then Fyodor Svechkov, he was really impressive. He's known as a two-way guy, but he showed that he can really be offensive in this tournament too. So it was nice to see the big guys come out, and a few young guys really impressed as well.
You brought up Nikita there. You guys have him at 21 in the FC rankings overall. Is there a risk versus reward in picking him earlier in the draft for you, or is this kind of a guy that's a surefire guy to pick and you can roll good to play for you? We always have that rough thing where they don't want to always come over.
Yeah, there's maybe a little bit of a risk with him, not necessarily like staying in Russia, but just I find that in some games he can kind of drift in and out. When he's on, he's really on though, and that's why he's a first rounder for us and consider that ceiling. And he's up there. He's not our top Russian, but he's very, very close. So yeah, there's maybe a little bit of risk, but not enough for me to keep him outside of the first round. He's so talented when he's on. He's got a wicked shot, and he was their captain at the U18, so he's got that leadership skill as well. He took that first game. He took a really bad penalty and. When he got out of the box, he apologized to his team, and then he led them to the win. So he knows how to play the game. He knows how to win. So I have faith in him.
Awesome. I only bring that up because he reminds me of a lot of Kuznetsov, where there's that risk reward of taking Kuznetsov. Washington took the chance, and it's paid off for them in space. He's helped win a Stanley Cup, and he's been a pretty good warrior for that Capitals team. Want to switch gears here a little bit from the Russians. That's probably the most Russians I've ever had on my show, so that's pretty cool. I wanted to talk a little bit about a Finnish player, Samu Tumala. Hopefully I have that pronounced. You guys have him at 46. He led Finland in scoring. He led that team, and he looked really good in my eyes doing it. Was this kind of like his coming out party?
I honestly, for me, he's a first rounder. He's a guy that I've brought up in the conversations at FC Hockey that I think should be a bit higher. He's pretty consistent as a goal scorer, and I've said it all year that I think he's got one of the best shots in the class. And for that, I think he will probably go near the end of the first. I know there's some concerns about his defensive play, and that's why we bumped him down in his compete. But I definitely think there's a potential for him to go in the first, and this tournament definitely gave him a platform to show off what he can do. He was lucky to play with Ville Koivunen, who they've played together all year long, so they had that chemistry, and it was really on display in the tournament. But yeah, you can call it a coming out party at an international level, but he's done that all year long, and he's definitely a guy that I have in my first round.
I got her too. I have to admit that. I'm glad you brought that up. For me, he's got that first round and the first round talent, but it's there. You spoke about his teammate. You spoke about Ville. Tell me a little bit about him and why he works so well with his teammate Samu there.
Yeah, so like I said, they played together all year, and they developed that chemistry. They got to play on a line together, so coming in, it was kind of a no-brainer to keep them together. He really impressed me. He's a guy that I've kind of been back and forth on this season, but he showed a really complete game, and he showed an ability to create offense. He didn't get a whole lot of goals, but he was involved in a lot, and he really just showed great vision in his passing, and he knows how to create offense. So I think he's a guy that we might move up. He he was in our top 100 in a previous edition. He fell out, and he's a guy that's kind of right on that edge of 100 for us. So our final ranking is coming out fairly soon in June. So we'll see where he ends up.
Mm-hmm. This is the first international tournament of this ilk that I've watched in a while that I didn't come away being taken by one guy from the Americans. Not one guy from the Americans was solo for me that took himself out of the conversation and above everybody else. Was there anyone for you on Team USA that elevated enough to make them a team?
The one guy that stood out on Team USA for me is Lane Hudson. He's a 2022 eligible defenseman, and I think he was arguably their best player. Sasha Pastujov is somebody I liked all season, and he really showed that he could be clutch in this tournament. So I don't think he raised his stock at all, but he kind of continued where he left off. But yeah, Hudson was just so impressive, and especially with Luke Hughes out of the tournament, who should have been their number one defenseman. Mm-hmm. I think Hudson really stepped up and really showed how he can create offense. His feet are just incredible. He can dance along the blue line. And then he didn't play a whole lot, but goaltender Caden Umberko, he played, I think, 2 games, and in both he was really impressive, and both he was hurt and had to leave the games. So I really wish he could have gotten more. He was no question their best goaltender of the tournament, and I think he did raise his draft stock a little bit for me.
This is usually a tournament that you could count on the Americans getting a medal, that the Americans are always at the top. But was a little bit different, or was there something off about this team that wasn't able to get them to that next level?
It's hard for them. So they have played together all year, right? So they should have that advantage. But they were hit pretty hard with injuries. Their top guys were out. So you missed Hughes, you missed Chaz Lucius, Jake Martin on defense, Andre Gasso, another forward. So that affected them, I think, quite a bit, and they brought in a lot of their young guys looking towards the future. Because I think the next couple of drafts, there's some top end Americans, and they'll be looking for gold. So I think this tournament was maybe them looking to the future a little bit and not as worried about keeping the medal streak alive. Whether that was the right call or not, you could always argue. But yeah, the next couple of years, I think they're going to be a threat again. So I don't think they're going to have to worry for very long.
Yeah, we'll hold off on that 2022 chat where it's going to be a lot of Americans, I think, in that first round. It's going to be an impressive run for them again. Overall, in the entire tournament, what was the biggest shock or biggest surprise for you watching this under-18 tournament?
Interesting question. Biggest surprise. Finnish defender Aleksi Haimosalmi. I'm probably butchering that name, but he's a guy that really stood out. I had him as my defenseman of the tournament, and he was a guy that I wasn't super high on coming into the tournament, but he really showed an ability to shoot down the ice in a hurry to create offense. He had 2 highlight reel goals, and he was arguably the most consistent defenseman in the tournament. You can include Brant Clark and Olin Zellweger in there as well, because I think they were pretty consistent. But I expected that of them. So Haimosalmi is the big surprise for me, I think. And then just how impressive the young guys were, whether that's Bedard Mishkov or Hudson, or there's so many others that really impressed. I think the players that are eligible for 2022 draft and 2023, I think stole the show in this tournament.
Yeah, don't worry about butchering Finnish names. Russian names for me are always trip me up for some reason. I can never get them. Yeah. Let's switch gears a little bit, talking about this awesome tournament that we just witnessed, and talk about what's coming up in July here. We've got an NH draft coming. We've got a lot of great prospects, a lot of unknown for these prospects. So let's dive into a few of these guys and see if we can break down and help these folks out decide who should be good for their team. But let's start in goal, because I found something really interesting on your guys' rankings. You've got 3 guys in the FC rankings in the top 32. That's unprecedented for a while. The sentiment is don't take a first-round goaltender. Why 3 guys first round for you guys?
Okay, so I think there's a couple of reasons. First off, I'm sure most people by now have heard that this is a weak draft class. I wouldn't necessarily call it a weak draft class, but there isn't that top end talent. So I think a lot of those goalies that might typically be in the second round, they get that little bit of a bump just because that top tier or two isn't really there in this draft. It still has the depth, but not that top end talent. So that helps. And then these goalies are just very, very good. So you look at Jesper Wallstedt. He's in the conversation with Spencer Knight and Yaroslav Askarov as the kind of unquestioned top talent. So he spent the entire season in the SHL. He even stole the starting job for a while. For a draft eligible, that's unheard of. You don't have a draft eligible guy in a men's league for the entire season, let alone stealing the number one spot. So he's going to be something special. He's a guy that I've really considered a lot first overall. I think this could be a player like Vasilevsky where we look back and think, why didn't they just bite the bullet and take him first? And then you look at Sebastian Cossa. He's our second goalie, and he's just dominating the WHL. I think he's maybe lost one game, but the numbers he's putting up are just ridiculous. And he did the same thing last year. He was just so dominant, and he's 6'6", so NHL teams love their big goalies. And the last guy is Ben Godrow. So he's a guy that's been in our first round all season, and yet he hasn't played until the U18s. And then the U18s came around, and he was goaltender of the tournament. So it was nice. It's a nice validation for us at FC Hockey to see him steal the show and steal the starting job for Canada. But he's very impressive. He didn't have the greatest stats last year, but that was more based on the team he was playing with, and his play was impressive enough to keep him in our first round all season. So we're probably going to stick with those three, and this is going to be an interesting goalie class to keep an eye on.
I love the chaos having three goalies in the top round of an NHL draft. Love the chaos it can bring. Let's just back up a little bit here and talk about Wallstedt. Is he the type of guy you can see a top end team taking a shot at making him a top 5 pick? Is he that good?
Yeah, and especially if the Red Wings are there, I think that's the team that'll bite. But yeah, he's. I think he can be a franchise guy. I think he can be that number one locked goaltender. He's just so calm and collected in net, even playing against men. And when he was at the U20s, he didn't play much. He was the backup goalie, and he got a little bit of playing time, and he was one of the best goalies in the tournament. So I've got high hopes for him, and he's a guy that I've constantly fought to get higher in our rankings. Not fought, he's been up there, but I've had him in my top 2-3. So yeah, I think he's a guy that I know most teams probably won't bite, but if anybody is, I think I could see Stevie Y and the Red Wings biting if they get top 5.
Yeah, Stevie Y is always an X factor at these drafts early on, but it seems to pay off for the guys. So I'm a big fan of Wallstedt myself, and I agree with your sentiment there. Let's have this conversation. Okay, I'm in Lethbridge. I'm a Hurricanes guy. I covered the team for a couple of years. I've seen Sebastian come through here a lot. I've seen him rep for the Hurricanes, and I saw how dominant he was in the Central Division. So I'm a little biased in my take, but I'm going to ask you the question. Koskov versus Godrow. If you had to pick, who are you picking and why?
I'd probably go Kossa, and it's tough because I think if we had a full WHL and a full OHL season, I'm not sure it would be that cut and dry. But right now, I think I would go with Kossa. He was just dominant this year, and he's got that extra size over Godrow, and I think his path to the NHL looks a little bit clearer to me. And again, if there was no HL season, I feel like I'd probably be saying the same thing about Godrow. So that's a tough question for me, but I think given the state of everything this year, it'll be Kossa going first.
All the questions can't be softballs. Come on, you know that, Josh. Your next goaltender at FC isn't ranked until 86. Does that speak to the depth of the goaltending position, or is there just nobody else that's blossoming in your guys' eyes?
After those three, there's definitely a drop. And yeah, I think there are a couple guys that I've got my eye on lower down, but there's a definite drop. And after that, you kind of get into the throwing darts at a dartboard of will they, won't they make it. So yeah, it's tough to take those guys. I'm not even sure there'll be a goalie taken in the second at all. If those three are gone in the first, and then the third is maybe where you see one or two pop up. But yeah, it's after those three, it's hit and miss. And Berko could be a guy that rose his stock a little bit. But yeah, we've got Jirmasuk there, and I'm sure I've got that name wrong, but he actually he didn't have a good U18, so we'll see if that hurts him or not. But he's a guy we've had good looks on through the season. So for us, he's still one of the better netminders behind the big three.
There's a lot of talk about who should be the number one pick. Who is the guy? Is there a guy that's clear and cut above everybody else? For me, there isn't. There's a couple of guys that could be at the first, but you guys have Hughes at the top. Luke Hughes, another Hughes brother. Is he clear-cut number one overall pick for you? And how does he compare to his brothers in that same spot?
He's not clear-cut for me, but he is my number one guy. So he has the benefit of being one of the youngest players in this draft class, and I think that does weigh pretty heavily for me. And he's also one of the players that improved the most over the course of the year. So just watching that development happen, and the fact that he's got a lot more to go, and the fact that this draft is so close at the top kind of gives him the edge for me. He's just 6 days away from the 2022 class. And I don't think he's at the level of his brothers. He's not that same mold as Hughes on defense, and he's not the and obviously with Jack Hughes, he's not at that level, I don't think. But he's right there, and he could be very close to Quinn. His feet are just unbelievable. His offensive game is great, and if he continues the development that he had this season and rounds out the defensive side of his game, he could be a number one defenseman. And I think there's a few guys at the top, Edmonton, Clark, Power, that they're kind of right on that edge of they could be maybe a 1D, but more likely they're a 2-3. But he's the guy that I like the chances of most.
You mentioned the next three guys I was going to talk about. Compared, a lot of people have Owen Powers as well as the number one overall pick. So let's start with him. How does Owen Power compared to Hughes for you?
It's interesting. I feel like all four of these defenders, they have certain things in common. They're very good with their feet, and they are more offensive leaning. For Power, I don't think he has the he doesn't have the speed and the agility of Hughes, but he is a good skater and he can create offense. He showed it for Michigan this year that he can jump up in the offense and score a highlight reel goal. Most of them will come from assists, but for him, his effort in his own end isn't where I'd like to see it for playing at that level at the NCAA. But yeah, with his size, 6'6", 214, it's hard not to see an NHL team taking him first overall. They love their size, and just the potential for him, I think they'll see is really high for FC. He's kind of been behind the other guys for us.
You guys have Edvinson at number 2 on your rankings. How close is he to being in that number 1 spot instead of Hughes for you guys?
Yeah, it's tough. I feel like looking at our rankings, I think any of the top 8 could be the first overall pick. You could even extend that to 10 for some people. I know Kent Johnson and Fabian Lizelle are in that conversation for others as well. But for me, I think the top 8 all have a really good chance of hearing their name called first. So honestly, I wouldn't be surprised to see any one of them go first overall. I think it depends on what team has the pick. And I think you could see a positional need be filled here.
Absolutely. There's a lot of good defensemen at the top of this draft, but the one guy that I always come back to when people ask me about my top 5, I always got to tell them about Brant Clark. I rave about this guy a lot. I love the skill on this guy, how he plays the game. Maybe back me up a little bit here, and what do you see in Brant Clark as a prospect here?
He it's interesting. So I didn't love it when he first went over to Slovakia. I think he took a little bit of time to adjust. But then he did, and he kind of exploded. And then that went into the U18s, where he was one of the top, if not the top defender. That was definitely a debate through the tournament. He is just so intelligent, especially in the offensive zone. And he moves so well. I know he's a little bit of a knock-kneed skater, but he moves very well. He's very agile. And there's obviously some mechanics of his skating to iron out, but what he can do with the puck is very impressive. And there's a reason that he's been in the conversation for first overall. And he's another guy. It just would have been so interesting to see a full OHL season, because he might have been the clear-cut number one had he had a full year in the league he was supposed to play in. But yeah, he's right there. He's a guy I really, really wouldn't be surprised to see first overall.
I love his skill set. I love how he thinks the game, and I just love his vision and and the way he plays with the puck. It's incredible to watch as a young player do such incredible things that he's doing. There are two forwards that you guys have ranked up there that I could easily see unseed and be the number one pick overall. So we're going to go through both of them. The favorite forward for me in the group is Matthew Beniers. I'm a Flames guy, as a lot of people know. He's the kind of player that Calgary would love to have. Maybe speak a little bit about Matthew Beniers and what makes him the top center in this draft.
Yeah, he's a guy that just never takes his foot off the gas. Both ends. We saw it all season long. We saw it. We saw it at the U20s, where he helped lead the USA. He's so good at forcing turnovers, at getting the puck back for his team, at winning races. Even though he's not the fastest guy, he seems to win every race, and that's exactly what you want. So I think if it's not power, I think Beniers is probably the favorite in the eyes of NHL teams. And he's probably one of the more NHL ready guys. I think the other forward we're going to talk about is a little bit more, is a little bit closer to the NHL. But yeah, Beniers, he's just very, very well rounded, and that compete is elite in this, and especially in this class, it really stands out above the rest.
You guys have him ranked at 4, and quite frankly, I see it hard for him to fall below 3 for me. But that's me personally. Who you guys have at 3, William Eklund, cannot really argue with his ranking and how his skill set is, and how NHL ready used it, as you mentioned, how NHL ready he already is. Just maybe a little bit about William and what makes him so special.
Yeah, we talked about this with Wallstedt, but with Eklund too, he spent the entire year in the SHL in the men's league. That's really impressive for a draft eligible. And not only that, he was a top 6 guy. He was playing with Alexander Holtz, the New Jersey Devils prospect, and looking very, very good. He contributed very well. And he's another guy. I wouldn't say he doesn't have the two-way ability of Beniers, but he can more than hold his own, and he's reliable. And his offensive game is very well rounded. He can dish it out. He can pot them himself. I see him, I think, more as a playmaking center, but he's very good. And I think like I said, I think he's probably, in my mind, he's the closest to the NHL of any player in this draft.
Now, the next guy I want to talk about is a guy that I is 2, but I've also seen his list 15 for some reason. Fabian Lysell, he seems to be everywhere on anyone's rankings. You guys have him at 10. What is Lysell? What can he be in your guys' eyes, and why do you have him at 10 and not higher or lower?
Sure. He is a speedy, creative winger. We saw it at the U18s. We saw it all season. He just moves so quick, and he's so creative, and he can get past any obstacle just in a split second. It's incredible to watch. There is some pause with him that most of his offense comes on the rush. So at the NHL level, most of it will come on the cycle. So he doesn't have the cycle game that some of the other forwards in this class have. But I just think he's a guy that we saw it at the U18s. He kind of carried Sweden, especially even when they were losing, but he was still their number one guy. He was still very consistent through the tournament. So I think he's kind of quieting those concerns. At least in my mind, he is. But I can see why NHL teams might have pause about that. Yeah, his creativity is just, he's one of the most exciting players, especially at the top of this class.
Mm-hmm. Interesting player for me. I see it all the time on Flames Twitter and Oilers Twitter and even Canuck Twitter, where it's all like, this guy needs to fall to us. Interesting. I had to ask about him. Another guy's name that I see coming up a lot, and I think this guy, using the U18s, increased his stock quite a bit, and that's Mason McTavish. Is he a tick now after this U18 tournament, or is he still going to be around that 15 spot for you?
It's another tough one. I think he's right on the edge. He's definitely on the fringe, and if you see a guy like Lozelle or even Ken Johnson maybe slip a little bit, then McTavish could be a guy to fill that top 10. But for me, I think he's right on the edge. He's definitely a top 15 pick for me. And I've said this on FC Hockey's podcast that I think with a full OHL season, he'd be a surefire top 10 pick. When Shane Wright was out in the tournament, he's the guy that stepped up and he was the leader on that team. He can be really, really dominant when he wants to be, and he plays with a little bit of grit. But he's skilled with grit. He's like Lucic when he was at his peak. Yeah, he's exciting. It'll be interesting to see where he goes for sure.
Want to go back to Finland for a second here, because there's a player here that when I talk to other people about, I either get one of two answers. It's a hard no, or it's a, I like the player, but I think he's a bit of a project. Atu Räty, he's a great player in my eyes. He's got this basic skill set, but he can be a bit of a project for a team. What do you see out of the finish forward, and where do you see him finishing? You guys have him at 19 on your draft rankings.
Yeah, so I actually did a deep dive on Räty this year, and I came away less impressed than I was heading into it. So I'm on the he's a project side of things. I think if you look at all of his skills, he is very good. He's got a great shot. He can handle the puck very well. He's a good playmaker. He just can't seem to put it together. So for me, the processing is a bit of an issue. I watched a lot of his games, and there are times when he's faced with a problem and he can't make a decision, or he can't drive the play forward. He just retreats and backs up. He loses the puck and creates a scoring chance against. There's a lot of that, unfortunately. And then I also saw games where he was arguably the best player on the ice at the legal level. And so I think he's a project, but there is a high ceiling, but there's also a low floor. So he's going to be a guy that's really interesting to watch as we go. And it could just be a case of the hype coming into the year, because he was considered as the number one pick coming into the year. Maybe that got to him a little bit. And then he didn't make the Liga team. He didn't make the U20 team for the World Juniors. So it could just be confidence, and he could bounce back next year. We'll see.
I'm glad you brought that up. I was going to ask you about that. He was to be the number one pick, or that conversation. Quite the fall to go down to 19 from number one. And now people are even saying that he could fall even further. Would it surprise you at this point for Räty to fall even further than 19 heading into the NHL draft?
I could see him in the 20s. I could see, just with the rise that some other players have had this year, and with him kind of stagnant, I could see him. I think he's a first rounder. I think a team will still take him in the first round. But yeah, I wouldn't be that surprised to see him go in the 20s. And again, that could be a steal if he pans out. So he's going to be one of the more fun players to track in the years to come, I think.
He's the kind of player for me that you keep an eye on, those teams that have 2 first-round draft picks. He's the kind of player that you take with that second draft pick there. Player because he has all that skill in the world. You guys have another player that I love. I love this player because I was able to watch a lot of Western Hockey League. I do it every year. The guy from Kamloops, Logan Stankoven? I can never pronounce his name. What about Logan for you guys has him in the top 20 of your draft?
Yeah, so he's a guy that I know our Western guys have been hyping all year, and then they were pretty proud of themselves at the U18s when he was one of Canada's, if not, yeah, he was one of Canada's top forwards. And so yeah, he's another guy that he never quits, and he's a smaller guy. He's 5'8", but there was one shift at the U18s that he took on 3 guys on the penalty kill, and he just held it in their end, and it was just so impressive to watch. Like this 5'8" guy holding off some bigger, stronger players, and yeah, just made it look like nothing. So I think he's a guy that I know we always kind of see shorter players fall in the draft. It's funny. I wouldn't be surprised to see him fall a little bit, but I also wouldn't be surprised to see him as a top 20 pick. There's a wide range that he could go. Like I said, he never takes a foot off the gas. He's really good at creating offense. He's also very reliable in his own end. So I really hope that a team bites early on him, because I think he's worth it. But we'll see. And I feel like a team that like the Carolina Hurricanes, who seems to take all of the public sphere's favorite players, I feel like that's got Stankovic written all over it.
There's this NHL size bias that a lot of teams still have, and I don't know why they have it, because a play like this proves why you. For me, this guy has a top 15 talent and should be higher in the draft. Could be a little biased in my Western Hockey League take there, but I really like the player, really like what he can do on the ice. And as you stated, he can play against bigger, stronger guys and still hold his own. He's tremendous. This is where the history of the NHL draft gets all jumbled in a big mess. From 20 onwards, every year seems to see there's going to be multiple guys. So I'm going to leave this kind of an open-ended question. Is there a guy out there that you think can sneak into the top 20 that you guys currently don't have ranked there? A little bit of a dark horse pick.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's going to be interesting to watch the guys from the QMJHL. So I think there's 4 big names to keep an eye on. Zachary Bolduc, Xavier Bourgault, Zachary Leroux, and Zach Dean. So 3 Zachs. They're easy to keep track of. But we've got them all, where are they? 25 to 30, those 4. But there's been, I feel like in our rankings conversations, they're the guys that we talk about most. And different scouts with FC have a different one first. I have Zach Dean as my top QMJHL guy, and he's our 4th on the rankings. But I think Zachary Bolduc, he's very strong in his two-way game, and he is one of the better finishers in this class, probably. I could see a team biting on him. Bourgault, he's a little bit older in this class, but he's probably one of the more well-rounded centers outside of the top 10. Leroux, I think he was a consideration for a top 10 pick coming into the year. And then there have just been some questions about his competitiveness, and he took a couple of bad suspensions, but I think the talent is still there. And then Zach Dean, he's one of my favorite players in this class, so I will probably be a little bit biased about him, but he's so good at creating chaos in the offensive zone. He can just tear defenses apart. So he's the guy that I would love to see go top 20. So we'll see. Those are 4 guys definitely to keep an eye on them.
I'm glad you brought up, I can't even say his name, the center from Halifax, Zachary. I'm glad you brought him up, because he seems to be the next in line of just the Moosehead factory of just producing these great first-round talents. I'm going to see if he can rise in the draft at all. Let's flip it around. We already talked about Ratty, so this can't be your answer on this one. Who's the biggest beware you guys have in the top 20 that you see can fall maybe that second, third round even?
Right now in the top 20, Simon Robertson probably. So he's a guy that I don't think he'd be that high for me. We've got him at 14 right now. But we saw it at the U18s. We've seen it in his regular season. He can kind of disappear a little bit in games. So when Sweden was not looking at their best in the world in the U18s, he was one of the guys that I don't even think he was noticeable out there. So he's a guy that I could see slip a little bit. Other than that, I think he's just outside the top 20. Carson Lambos. I think he's going to be a really interesting name to watch because entering the season again, he was in the conversation for first overall, and now I think Bob McKenzie was talking about how he could slip into the second, third round. So we still think that he's got the skill to be a first rounder. His development hasn't continued to climb like we'd hoped, but there is still some hope with him. So he's a guy that could slip though, and that would be quite the fall considering he was in that top 3 conversation.
I think a lot of these show why this year is such a mixed bag, if you will, of this guy could go in a number of different spots. It's going to be so interesting to see how this draft shapes up and who goes where and who picks where. I wanted to wrap up here with something a little bit different. I want to look ahead to the 2022 draft because we talked about one guy, Shane Wright, but there's one guy I have to talk about. It's the Finnish player. It's Lambert. Tell us about Lambert and as we look ahead to 2022 and why he could be the guy maybe to unseed Wright as that number 1 consensus pick.
Yeah, for sure. Similar to Wright, we talk about that maturity. Brad Lambert has been playing in the men's league, the Liga, and looking very, very good. He's been playing not the best minutes, but he's looked very good with the time that he's had. And he played the U20s, and I think he's one of the best players in the tournament. He didn't look great in the U18s, but I think he was playing hurt because he got hurt early in the tournament, missed a game or two, and then didn't look the same coming back. So I think he was probably playing hurt. But yeah, I think right now Wright has that top spot. It's obviously very, very early, but Lambert is very much a guy that could steal that. I think he'll play a full season in the Liga next year, and Wright will play in the OHL. Hopefully we have a season, and yeah, that's going to be an exciting battle. And it's fun because even the spots after him are pretty wide open. There's some high-end guys. I think Matthew Savoie probably has that third spot right now, but it's pretty close with Ivan Miroshchenko, who played for Team Russia, Rutger McGroarty for Team USA. There's some guys that are going to be very exciting to watch. Those top tiers are back in 2022, and it's going to be exciting to watch.
It's also nice to have a Finnish guy at the top of a draft that has a North American style name that we can all pronounce and say. It makes it a little easier for us here. So always looking ahead. It is to look ahead to 2022, but I had to ask the questions because of how special that draft is going to be, not to look too far ahead into the future. Josh, thank you so much for your insight today on these top prospects and the U18. I appreciate your time and setting aside for me today.
For sure, John. Thanks for having me. Anytime. Happy to help.
Not a problem. And just before you go here, where can people find you and your work, and what do you have coming up for these folks in the next couple of weeks before we have the draft?
Yeah, for sure. So you can find me at Joshua Bell 31. Right now I am fully geared up for the FC Hockey Draft Guide. So that will be dropping in June and chocked full with a lot of information on this draft. And then article-wise, I've also got a mock draft that will be coming out on Sporting News Canada just after the lottery. So when we get a little bit of a clearer picture. But yeah, other than that, lots of content getting geared up for the draft. So it's going to be a fun stretch here.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Josh. I'll let you enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks.
Thank you. And that was John of Future Consideration. Those guys are awesome. Look up their stuff on Twitter or on the web. Really good rankings. Those guys know what they're doing. They know what they're talking about. I use it every year. That draft guide's coming out in a couple weeks, as he said. It's a good ranking. It's a good system that they use. It's not just one guy's opinion. They take scouts from all across North America and the United States. They have guys over in European, and they all watch all these games, and they watch these guys 2 or 3 years out, and they come together to make their picks. Now, they don't have a consensus number 1, although they're leaning towards Hughes. A lot of guys are leaning towards Powers. So there's like big question marks at the top, but these guys know what they're talking about. I encourage you to pick up their draft guide to the NHL draft that comes up later on in the springtime. We are going to end here with a little bit of National Hockey League talk. I wanted to fit some playoff talk in. It's just going to be me. I don't have another guest coming up, but it's just going to be me. So I wanted to touch on a few things that I've noticed from around the National Hockey League over the last little while. Round 1 in the National Hockey League playoffs is coming to a close here. We got some teams going through already. We've got some elimination games happening as I'm recording this. It's tremendous hockey. Round 1 of the playoffs always is. Every year where you're flipping channels and you're trying to watch all the games at once. I know I try to, and it doesn't always work out. And your attention gets pulled in a few different directions. But if you were able to focus on a one series or another, how could it not be the Battle of Florida? The Panthers and the Lightning going toe-to-toe. Talked about this on a few other shows about how good that this battle is that we have for Florida, for the fans in the southern states, and what it could mean for that area. It's amazing to watch these two teams go head-to-head because it is an absolute war between the Lightning and the Panthers. As we record this, they're just about to drop the puck here for Game 6. Panthers trying to stave off elimination. The Lightning, defending Stanley Cup champions, and the eyeballs on this series has been tremendous growth for the game. And I think that's really important to remember that these are two teams in Florida that have never met before in a playoff type atmosphere. And now we get it during a pandemic, which is a little bit unfortunate on the timing. Yet that there's enough people in that building that the atmosphere in both rinks has been electric, and that it is able to help the game grow in Florida. So I'm really awesome series going on there. The other series in that division also involving two teams in the southern states, in Carolina and Nashville. I think that's really helping the game continue to grow in those areas. Both those teams have had moderate success over the last couple of years. The Predators reaching a Stanley Cup final and the Hurricanes reaching an Eastern Conference final definitely help their causes. But I really like those two series for a couple of reasons. The action obviously has been one, but the growth of the game cannot be understated with those teams finding some success here in the playoffs. And what's going to be awesome is in round 2, 2 of those 4 teams are going to move on, obviously, and they're going to play one another. So it's another Southern States battle in the hot part of the country where they don't normally have a lot of hockey. So I like that. We're going to get 2 rounds of Southern States going head-to-head to help grow the game in that area. Tremendous. That is one of the storylines that underlines my playoff watching thus far. We also saw a little bit, up in the other divisions where we saw a Boston-Washington. That's normally an Eastern Conference final matchup. It's a first-round matchup in Boston dispatches of Washington. Washington wasn't able to get any saves in that series. Really was Boston's show to run after they lost Game 1. And then we also saw Pittsburgh and the Islanders in that division go head-to-head. They currently are playing in Game 6. I don't have any updates. You'll know all these results by the time this show airs. What a battle that's been. Pittsburgh also can't seem to be getting any saves, and Tristan Trice seems to have fallen apart a little bit. Very interesting to see how that series is going to play out and see if the Islanders can complete the job there. An Islanders-Boston second round would be very interesting to watch. The Islanders surprising a lot of teams again, and they shouldn't be because of how they've been playing for a couple years now under Barry Trotz. Love those series as well. We've also seen Vegas and Minnesota go toe-to-toe a little bit. A lot of people thought Vegas would steamroll over the first couple of rounds. They were the team to beat for a lot of teams, but they ran into a team that they've had a tough time with in Minnesota. Minnesota down 3-2 in the series, looking to try and stave off elimination. Game 6 coming up for them. That's going to be a very interesting game to watch for sure. Vegas trying to get through. The only team that really didn't have a difficult in round 1 in the States divisions was Colorado. They just rolled over St. Louis. Jordan Binnington looked like a sieve. He couldn't stop a puck, and they just rolled right over top of him. Nathan McKinnon, how impressive was he again? He seems to show up every playoffs this way. And not a lot of love given to his line mates, and it should be. Landeskog was absolutely brilliant for the Avalanche in that series. Up north here, we saw another sweep. The Edmonton Oilers unable to win any of the 3 overtime games, and they fall to the Winnipeg Jets. Not enough can be stated what Winnipeg did to slow down Connor McDavid. And the way that they defended him in layers, and they made him come through multiple guys, and he wasn't able to elevate his game enough to pull the Oilers along, begs the question, Is there enough in Edmonton to get them through? It's going to be an interesting offseason for the Oilers. And then we also saw the unfortunateness of John Tavares for Toronto Maple Leafs. Unfortunate for him. But his team has rallied around that a little bit, it looks like, and they've taken the 3-1 series lead, and they've made it look pretty easy. Watched the last game, and it didn't seem like Montreal had anything left in the tank or any resistance to Toronto. So interesting to see how that series goes off. So that's my quick run through of the National Hockey League playoffs here. Again, thank you so much to Josh Bell for joining me. Go check out his stuff on Future Considerations Hockey. It's really good stuff. Really looking forward to the draft because there's a lot of people can go a lot of different ways, and they got 3 goalies in the top 32 ranked on their rankings. That's insane. Haven't had that for a long time. I really think that you could have a guy, Jesper Wallstedt, taken in the top 5, maybe even top 3 if a team's feeling a little frisky, depending, like he said, where Detroit finishes. So really looking forward to that. Draft lottery comes up before the next show. So we have a little bit of that results coming up next week for you. And next week as well, joining me, my first ever female guest on the show. Finally able to get an awesome lady to join me on the show. Tori Peterson from the Flames webpage and Flames TV will join me to talk a little bit about prospects and the draft and other hockey topics. Thank you so much for joining me here this week on the Double Digit Hockey Show. You can find me on social media at VintageJohnny84. Hit me up. Let's have some more hockey conversation. Thank you so much for your time this week. I'll see you guys again next Thursday at 6 p.m. Mountain Time here on ASTV Productions. Have yourselves